Miles. Hi, Brooke.
Hello.
Hello.
I am so excited to have Miles on the show because, gosh, we just realized it was 4 years ago now. I actually had the honor of doing a program. Miles was one of the facilitators of the program on contemplative psychology with a theme on compassion, right?
It was an amazing, amazing ride. We had also a Bob Thurman there. I remember that retreat at Menlo was a real winner.
I felt like I had found my way home. It was, I think, the first long program I did that was actually based on spirituality, which is really funny because I have my master's in counseling psychology with a transpersonal emphasis. Miles and I actually went to the same school. And yet I feel like I barely learned anything about spiritual practice in my master's degree. So when I sat down in that training with this group of people who were just making the time and space to look at these ancient teachings, I was like, oh, I'm home. And then Bob Thurman just went on a tear that had me laughing and just I found my place.
Yeah, Bob Thurman is a lunatic from another planet.
I love him.
So important.
Yeah, very important.
So, Miles wrote this amazing book, and it's actually on gradual awakening. And as you all know, we love to talk about awakening on this show. It actually draws a lot of its inspiration from an ancient Tibetan text called the Lamrim, and we'll get into that. But we have a passion spot that we really wanted to begin with, which is based off of a term you coined, Miles, which is McMindfulness. So I think all of us have some similar thoughts on mindfulness and meditation today as it's been popularized, with things like goals like, I want to achieve more, so I'll meditate, or I just want to calm my mind. And the way that it can diminish the power and intent of meditation. So I wanted to just read a quote of yours because it summed it up so freaking poetically, and then see if we could hear some of your thoughts on this. So, all right, everybody, I'm quoting. Any meditation practice that fails to address our culture's distorted worldview of scientific reductionism grounded in nihilism and its equally misguided offshoots, materialism, hedonism, imperialism, neoliberal capitalism, and consumerism, that constitute the current zeitgeist and fails to connect them directly to our society's mental health pandemic, general apathy, and the broader plight of our planet in peril is dangerous. Any such approach is the equivalent of encouraging people to rearrange the furniture when their house is on fire. So that's a really powerful statement. I thought we could just start there.
Well, let's not waste any time, shall we?
No, we'll just get right to the mic drop moment of the book.
We've been dying for this talk.
Well, first of all, thank you for highlighting that section of the book. That's the central argument, and I put my neck out there because it's not a very simple thesis for a book, and it's certainly not a glamorous one, and that might be the point. In order for me to discuss that particular paradigm, we might also have to just back up to what you were saying at the outset, which is this term McMindfulness, which is coming from around 2010. Before we get to McMindfulness, we also just have to sort of appreciate where my head was coming from, because the short story is that I had spent, let's say, more than a decade sort of hanging out in the Buddhist world, in a Buddhist cultural milieu, and really savoring some of the fantastic wisdom teachings that come from its original context. And then at a certain point, I migrated into a clinical setting at Harvard at Herbert Benson's Mind Body Clinic. And there I was exposed in contrast to a very secular and radically reduced pith instruction for a wider audience. And we were doing clinical trials and dealing with people with heart disease and pain and monitoring and facilitating basically in a very quick way introduction to meditation so that they could get some health outcome benefit. but I was just internally sort of disillusioned by the whole thing because I had just come out of India and after sitting under the Bodhi tree in Bodh Gaya where the Buddha gained enlightenment and living with the monks and being in a really full throttle milieu which spans thousands of years back and isn't sort of an unchanging process. And so I had these two exposures, and one was almost like, where's the beef? You know, like, and then I've sort of had a lot of my mentors challenge me because I think everybody is in agreement, and I am in agreement too, that we cannot, in order for meditation to be available, it has to be secularized because the notion of a religious practice is just not going to appeal to a large population. But I think by the time 2010 rolls around and I was interviewed by Danny Fisher for this article, I just needed to get something in just to push back on the tremendous interest and sort of glamorous presentation and a kind of pitch that I was seeing, a marketing pitch about how amazing mindfulness was and how it could be used for just about anything. And I think at that time there was every other third book was about mindfulness and like mindfulness for this and mindfulness for that and mindfulness, but not a lot on wisdom, not a lot on ethics, simply just about the technique and kind of a kind of marketing pitch that it can do so much. And I've read all the research, and it's not like they're lying, but in another way, I just feel like the hooks of our own consumerism and our own marketing prowess just took mindfulness by the reins and was turning it into $1 billion industry. And at the same time, I felt like some of the teachings that constitute the entire Buddhist path are really what we need. And so in order to, you could say that breakout critique happened to 2010, but it's not until Gradual Awakening, my current book, that I fully articulate the entire thesis, which you laid out now. We've kind of got this. Look, if you and I and all of us sit down and we look at the world, we have a real fucking problem on our hands. Are we in agreement?
Yes, we are.
And there's many ways to slice it, but if you just look at the ice caps melting, if you look at the polarization, the geopolitical crisis, the economic divide, you look at all these insane factors, variables on our planet right now. It's true from a Buddhist point of view that all of them are being driven by what are called the three poisons: the human mind, unchecked forces of human instinct of greed and hatred and delusion. It's true. And we cannot find a period in human history when none of those were happening, where there wasn't poverty or where there wasn't war, where there wasn't, economic prejudice and like these kinds of things. But there is something in the last 300 years that has made those things amplified and totally berserk. Okay, so like it's only taken 300 years for us to completely put our species and all other species in danger. And as a father of two young kids, I've had to really sit down and take a very honest look and come up with an explanation for how did we get here? How did we get here? I mean, the Buddhism has been around for a long time and has an explanation, but it doesn't necessarily have an explanation for how it is that we arrive at such a rapid demise. And such a global, far-reaching convergence of crises. And in order to answer that, I've had to go back in about 300 years to the Enlightenment, where we have a pendulum swing between religion and science. We move away from religion because of barbarism and authoritarian dictatorship and blind faith and crusades and pedophilia and all the rest of it. We got rid of it. We got so sick of it that a pendulum swing movement happens to the other extreme, and we break out with logic, individualism, science, technology, medicine. And for that, we're thankful, because look at all the benefits that we've created, from sending a person to the moon to curing illnesses to creating the World Wide Web and internet and etc. But we also find ourselves in these really disturbing, teetering on the edge phenomenon because of a paradigm. And the paradigm has to do with being so individualistic and so materialistic and so hedonistic. In other words, we're automatons. We have one life to live. We are brain jelly. We die at the end of our, the electric activity in our brain at the end of death proves that at the end of that there's nothing to it. Mm-hmm. So if we have to drink, eat, be merry for tomorrow, we die basically, and we're just gobbling up the resources, and everybody's out for theirs, and people on the top don't care about anybody else because we live in an inconsequential nihilistic worldview. That's basically what's running the show right now. And scarily enough, we are exporting that from the West all over. So places like India and Mexico and etc. just want their Coca-Cola, Levi's, and Marlboro cigarettes, look the part, and follow suit by exploiting everything else on the planet. So it is a disease. It is a mean disease, if you will. And we're creating a unified culture of that's going to destroy us. So I think that's how I explain where we are. And I don't think, with the time that we have remaining, that it's possible to just sit down and gently follow the breath or do a few yoga poses and put an end to that. So that is what I'm explaining is the limits of the mindfulness revolution. If you just have the technique, and you sit and count your breath, and you get gentle, and you put a little spritzer on your yoga mat, and you burn a few candles, and you say a few prayers, I just don't think it's going to be enough. I don't think it's going to be enough given the time. It's not going to be far-reaching enough or penetrative enough or expeditious enough or effective enough to reach deep down into the fundamental program where the paradigm lies and reverse it. So maybe I'll turn it back over to you to get some of your thoughts so we can kick this conversation off.
Well, I'm thinking Vanessa and I did an episode a while back titled "The Spiritual Path is Not a Benzo." And, that basically there's this way that the paradigm, it's like an infection, right? It can infect anything that it touches with its worldview. And so it can take these practices, it can take these traditions, it can take these whole cultures, wisdom cultures, and reduce it down to what we have, which is a pill that'll make you feel better. So if you can just follow the breath, or you can be more calm, you can be nicer, you can be more productive, all these things you can achieve more. And we've seen that, those are our cultural values. And it reinforces the objectification of everything, as opposed to liberating from the objectification of everything, which I believe is what the path is actually designed to do. So, like you were saying, truly, these wisdom practices, truly this path in its genuineness is really a dose of what we need culturally. And you talk about, paradigm therapy. So I'd be interested to hear more about how you see, like, if we could get these back in full embodied ways, as opposed to strip mining them for techniques, how is that the antidote to the paradigm sickness?
That's so beautiful. So I love that. Benzos, what'd you call it? Benzo?
Spiritual path is not a benzo.
Okay, it's not a benzo. And then strip mining, that's another great, because that's so true. We're like into extracting, right? We just want the raw material, and then everything else can go to shit, right? We just want the pith of it, and we don't care about
Give me my treats.
Then we don't care about like the displacement of all the earth and the trees above, as long as we get that that gram of gold, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, again, those are part and parcel of like our Eurocentrism and our materialism. They are just symptoms. They're symptomatic of the deeper paradigm. So if we're all in agreement, and I'm sure there's a number of different ways to look at it, okay? And this is just one way, but I think so we're just having an open conversation where we can make our way through some of the themes of the book, and so far we're in agreement that we're in a dire predicament, and it's just like the Four Noble Truths. First truth is that we're in a dire predicament. We are symptomatic. The topsoil is ruined. The ice caps are melting. The corporate sector has hijacked the political systems, and the economic systems are outdated because they run by way of a paradigm of infinite growth on a planet of finite resources. So everything, every sector of human civilization right now is up for critical analysis because it's on life support. So we are in agreement about that.
As then are individuals, just to add that level to it, depression, anxiety, existential crises. Like, we are, as even individuals, reflecting this larger global suffering that you're describing. So it's not even as if, oh, well, I'm fine as long as I spritz something on my mat and do a couple of deep breaths, because we're suffering under this illness personally as well. Would you agree?
Well, thank you for reminding me. Yeah, because like I'm included in that. Like I've just been through 18 months of one of the deepest depressions that I can imagine, and so probably of my entire life. So I'm definitely included, and I'm on a spiritual quest to find solutions. But it's not that I have the answer. I'm really deeply just very concerned, first and foremost, for my own mental state, but also that of my family, my children, but also the welfare of everybody else. And particularly as a therapist, and all of you guys are working with individuals, I think ourselves included, but the people we work with are constantly coming in with maladies. But I think what unifies them all is an underlying malady, that living in a concrete civilization with a meaningless work life, feeling deadly apathetic about the future, and not much purpose or meaning, is really destroying the internal world of people, including us. And we're finding it very hard to keep up. So yes, I think that's a great thing to agree and include on the outset. Is we have a cultural malady that's symptomatic of in these various ways, but we're also anxious beyond measure, depressed beyond measure, in orders of magnitude higher than we've ever seen before. And the general population, from Athens to New York, and certainly in the Arab countries, the young people of this planet are not very happy with their circumstance, with their lot in life, because they have been thoroughly disenfranchised. It does not look good if you're living in Portugal and you're 25 years old right now. So, yes, I would agree with that. So we would say let's say that's a thorough first noble truth review of our current sickness and all its symptoms, both sociologically but also personally. Then we would have to look deeper into the second noble truth, and there I would suggest that the Buddhists have a very good transgenerational, they're able to locate something that goes beyond time and space with the addictions of greed and delusion and aggression. But I think I'm trying to say that in the last 300 years, it's almost we've put like a magnifying glass on top of that match and amplified it greatly with neoliberal capitalism. That is a kind of capitalism that has no checks and balances anymore. There's no regulation. It's just a few people can just basically make all the political decisions and do what they want with the entire system. And they've co-opted the media circus, which is now just a propaganda arm for the corporate elite. And let's not go into deep state stuff right now, but we've got a serious problem, right? And so there's that sort of deep seated instinctual programming on a personal level that's then amplified by the socio-political and economic systems. They're geared towards benefiting the few. So then you want to talk about the solution, and the best that I can come up with is, well, mindfulness is not going to be enough. I mean, 2 years ago, I was invited to a conference in Amsterdam, which is one of the most outstanding conferences I've ever been to. It's called the Inner Peace Conference. It happens in October. And it's really 3 days where the city of Amsterdam is transformed into a peace summit. And you can attend beautiful 400-year-old churches And all day long, there are teachers of various traditions giving classes, and it's basically a smorgasbord all day of this class and Kundalini yoga, and then this kind of yoga and that kind of meditation, but they also include wisdom practices and teachings and Dharma talks, and it's a fantastic, definitely full of integrity, but it is still the Inner Peace Conference, okay, and. At that time in my thinking, I was just really struck by the limits of an individual calming down and taking a few breaths, going to the yoga studio, going to the ashram, going on a Dharma adventure, having things be peaceful is like a provisional necessity, prerequisite, you could say, but not a total solution. Because the code has to be changed, and not only the individual code, but we need a new political system. We need a new economic system. We need new agricultural systems. And to be honest, I don't think the Buddhists know how to deal with that stuff. So, like, I've spent 20 years of my life learning this programmatic level and the wisdom traditions that are capable of getting deep down to the instincts. But it's time for conversations with people who have spent 20, 30, and 40 years learning how to do permaculture, learning how to do new Bitcoin, blockchain, revolutionary ideas for new economic systems that bypass the central banking system, for example, and allow just the common person to have a go at life, And so spiritual teachings and spiritually informed people are also going to have to bond together with social activists and political activists, and people are on the cutting edge of new social design if we're going to have a chance at redoing the entire thing, both inner and outer. And so that critique is part of the book too, because I'm 42 years old and I'm coming at the limits of a long, intensive study. First and foremost, the Buddhist study is limited, and they say change your mind to change the world. And in a way, I think we all understand it. But in another way, it's a little naive because it assumes too much. Like, how? Is it just a mentally created world, and if we just all get all peaceful, it will transform? No, I'm sorry. We're going to need to have different systems, and people are going to have to create those systems, and they're actually sophisticated and technical. So there's going to have to be someone with a lot of expertise, or a lot of people coming together with a lot of expertise to design them. And so I'm coming up against the limits of that, as I am coming up against the limits of my own psychotherapy practice. I'm sure as body workers and coaches, you're also experiencing the limits of your own small little discipline. I mean, haven't you discovered at some point that you really need to network and collaborate with other healthcare providers and practitioners to really address the full spectrum of what your client is bringing in? If you're a body worker, you might have to refer for psychotherapy. If you're a psychotherapist, you might have to refer to energy healing. If you're, if you do any of those, you might have to also include an astrologer to get a top-down perspective. Suddenly, we're working in a much more interdisciplinary and multicultural way, because we're noticing the limits of each of our disciplines, and this is a very unique time and place where we can actually cross divides and bring people together. And it's almost like that image that comes out of the Buddhist text where there are four blind people touching different parts of the elephant, and they don't know what the full gestalt of what they're dealing with is like, I've got the trunk and you've got the hoof, and or the foot or the tail and the ear. But like suddenly, like, we can work together to create a bigger map that is inclusive of both the internal environment, but also the external environment, the inner instincts, but also the social domains, the social and geopolitical domains that have to be bridged. So I think that is a broad way of starting to talk about the third noble truth, which is the possibility of freedom. But that's such a kind of cliche thing. I think we just assume, okay, it's possible to change, but how? How are we going to change? So I think one of the points that I'm making is that it's going to take us working together in different disciplines to create a broader, full-scale map of the human being's capability, but also not just do an inner work, also combine that with the outer work. So that's the first thing. The other thing is, maybe I'll just put it out there, and then I can include you guys, because I don't want to take all the airtime here. But the other thing would be that we can't wait for Obamas to do it anymore. I don't think there's the end of waiting for the one top-down resolution is over. I'm not going to say it's the end of the guru, because I am always going to think that a guru serves an important purpose. But it is the end of us feeling so juvenile and inadequate that, I mean, if you notice on the planet, there's grassroots movements of people, uprising movements, where the common man and woman are reclaiming their innate power to stand up against some of this, and that's what it's going to take. That is exactly what it's going to take. So I'll just stop there just to hear some of your thoughts. I'm so sorry.
No, I don't apologize. It's great.
You're the guest. I mean, of course, what you're pointing to there is not just theory. We're observing it, right? Consciousness is coming forward in groups of people rising up together. So, I mean, you just said a lot. Let me just pull out a couple of thoughts that were on my mind. I mean, on one level, we're talking about interconnectivity. And you are talking in the book about awakening, you know, that we can awaken if we follow this process, and that as we do have this gradual awakening, we have greater access to clarity. I mean, how can you think differently than the conditioning of the sickness of paradigm would have you think, unless you have some access to basic clarity, right? So in a way, when they talk about inner peace, I mean, the joy and the power of taking an actual unfolding path is that you can see through all of the bullshit, all of the conditioning, all of the, well, this is what everybody does kind of attitudes, so you can access a new, more creative and aligned way of experiencing things. So I think for me, one of the things I love is, I love the idea of the sickness of paradigm from the standpoint that when I started meditating, it was no choice. I needed it. I was nihilistic, I was despairing, I was hopeful, I was all of it, I was drawn on the path. So I found my way to meditation fairly easily, quote unquote. I use that meaning I could practice. But most people don't even want to sit and have a practice. Why? No context. No context. And then you can have a practice, and what happens when you have a practice and you start to unravel or deconstruct? Like when I first started studying meditation, it was in the Shambhala tradition, and I started to unravel rapidly, and the depth of despair that was opening up in me was greater than I knew how to relate to. And I didn't have a guru. I didn't have a teacher to go to. I was by myself in it, and there was no context really supporting me in the way of like instruction. So I feel like this context, you called it, correct me if I'm wrong, Miles, but you called it like the quantum view. This context, which is like the paradigm therapy, is extremely important on all these levels. One, so we can actually liberate ourselves, because all of our listeners are very sensitive people. They've tried a million things, and they realize where it ends. Like, okay, it's not getting me there. They've been disillusioned with the easy, quick fixes, really. And so from a personal level, if we want to actually be free of suffering, we need a real path. And then from the collective level, if we want to have clarity, if we want to have creativity, if we want to have actual interconnectivity where people care about each other, we need a clearer path.
I don't know what it took so long for us to get together. If that's your audience, that's the kind of people I want to hang out with.
Yeah,
they are pretty great.
Get to know them. That's the people. We've found a beautiful niche of people who it's like, I always used to say, if you're even going to see me as a client, you probably have to have had your first disillusionment with life, or you are not going to like what I have to say about it.
Right.
Yeah, so at least you recognize it's a niche, okay? Because it feels to me that still the broader brushstrokes of the spiritual market is feel good, yoga journal type, looks good, feels good type. It's spiritual materialism, or it's spirituality with an underbelly of pleasure principle driven agenda. But for a subset of people that I think have been either around the block or have had enough time to sample that and long enough to realize it has limits and that there must be something else. That's the kind of person I wrote the book for. And when we sat down with the publisher, they were so kind because first and foremost, I'm an unknown entity. I don't have a big following. I didn't come with thousands of people on Facebook. And in today's publishing world, that's like, that's everything. But Sounds True took a big gamble on me, and we had been in conversation for years and years and years. And my reach wasn't developing, but they somehow thought it was a timely message. And I owe them a huge debt of gratitude for not sort of selling short on the principle here. But I think they really resonated with the message. But it was clear when we were in negotiations around the contract that this is for a small subset of people, because this is not the mainstream thing, and maybe the mainstream will just continue for as long as it takes until people have had enough time to sample what's available to them, until they get to this point that you're talking about, where they reach a limit or an impasse with where the current methodology can take them. And let's not poo-poo it. Like if you have a health problem and you've benefited from mindfulness, an 8-week MBSR program, that's an incredible open door for some people. Let's be clear about that. But then when it comes to these symptomatic issues, these larger global symptomatic issues, or the level of apathy and the level of purposelessness that come by way of being reduced so thoroughly to brain jelly, I like to call it, then I think we're going to need a little bit more. So I think what you were alerting to is that what's the little bit more? And for that, we'd have to get into the fourth noble truth. We're not just talking about awareness, actually. I mean, awareness is key, but awareness is part of the meditative offering that's already available in the culture. So why isn't that enough? I mean, the way that I've been trying, it's funny, writing the book is one thing, but then pitching it and talking about it after you write it is a completely other thing. So thank you for the opportunity to articulate some of these things, because it's like an evolution. I've just given a couple of book talks, and I wasn't I didn't prep. No one prepped me on like, okay, it's a different thing to start talking about the premise of the book and what's really important. But one way I've come up with I think maybe some people can understand that is, if you have a world picture that the world is flat, and there are people out there right now there's like a little subculture of flat Earth people.
I saw them on the news. Did you see that, Brooke? I saw like a whole thing on that of like, meetings.
Yeah, sure.
And they have some very interesting ideas. I mean, It's worth looking into and looking at some of those ideas. But that we could say that that's a kind of worldview. Okay, you think that the world is flat, and out of that worldview, you were going to start to live a certain way. Okay, your lifestyle is part and parcel rooted or grounded in your worldview. So let's say you don't want to leave your block if you think it's a flat Earth, because you're afraid that you're going to tumble off the edge. Okay, and this is a little bit of a caricature, but if you then see the world a particular way and you live in the world as a result of seeing the world that particular way, which is the equivalent of, well, there are infinite resources and we have an economic paradigm where we would just gobble them up infinitely. And yet that isn't the case. It's a wrong worldview. And the way we've been living is rooted in that wrong worldview. That's how we explain where we are right now. And my point is if you just go to the ashram and you sit and count mantras, or you follow your breath, or you do some beautiful yoga postures, it's very unlikely that you're going to dig deep enough down into your worldview. What you're going to do is suspend your worldview until you have a kind of feel-good experience. Now, not everybody has a feel-good experience when meditating, as you clearly indicated, and I'm sure we've all worked with people that have come and said, I unraveled. It was a scary experience. Like, if you do a 10-day Vipassana retreat and you're not prepared, you can brush up against the abyss, which is another kind of implicit worldview. So either way, it's not guaranteed that if you do your meditative practice that you're going to get down into the code where the program and the lifestyle components are. most likely what's going to happen is you're going to have a suspension and either have a beautiful, blissful experience or a scary one. But either way, you're going to come back from your yoga vacation and just continue with the status quo.
Right.
So part of what the Buddhist tradition does is it offers not just one, what do you call that, leg in the three-legged bar stool. So it's actually got an 8-legged bar stool that can be reduced to a 3-legged bar stool. And just one of the legs is meditation, with the other 2 legs is wisdom, or what I'm calling quantum view, the view that is able to penetrate deep enough to see the interconnectivity of all things, which would be a replacement for the a Newtonian paradigm, or the paradigm that sees things as building blocks or atoms that can be controlled. That Newtonian paradigm is the single most important variable 300 years ago in the age of reason that we use as a launch pad to dominate matter and create science and the scientific revolution. But it is also the same phenomenon or worldview that makes us believe that we can dominate the planet and that we're just independent automatons and gobbling up resources. So quantum view is about penetrating that and getting to the wave-like essence of things, which is what the mystics have always talked about. Mm-hmm. But then, based on that mystical worldview, then you'd have these recommendations that they're in every world culture, really. How to live with each other from a quantum paradigm. The First Nations people of North America knew how to live in nature, and I'm a big fan of quoting this First Nations elder. One of my buddies, Phil, is doing a documentary. He was at Standing Rock about 6 months ago, and after all the media hype left, Vice News and Fox News, they all rolled out, and the iconic image of the opposing forces of the First Nations people and the National Guard. Once they cleared, Phil still he hung out there after the hype had died down, and because of the sincerity of his heart, some of the First Nations elders brought him in, and they actually did something very rare with Phil, which was give him exclusive access, including some very, very profound ceremonies, which were incredibly transformative for him. I mean, they blew his mind, and we had long talks and debriefs about some of the transformative experiences that he was able to gain access to. But there's one soundbite from his documentary where he's looking at this young, probably about 35-year-old Lakota elder who's looking at Phil, and he says, Your culture's way of life has a shelf life of about 300 years. And what you are seeing right now is the ceiling effect of your way of living. Our way of life, we could live on this planet indefinitely. Yeah. And that is a very bold claim. But I think if you've been around the block, you can resonate. You can resonate with some very deep truth there. Yeah,
feels really true, for sure.
Well, I'd just be curious to hear what you guys think of it.
Well, you couldn't see it on Skype, but I was doing a happy dance when you were talking about the Newtonian idea being like the beginning of this fracture, the big passion of mine. The way it turned everything into object out there that I control, or I'm an object that is controlled, or we all come off some factory assembly line, and that this is what's breaking down in every area of life. And I think some really beautiful things are emerging, like a reconnection, like you're talking about with your friend with his documentary, or like the book that you wrote and talking about this gradual path. And you use a really beautiful frame in the book that I think to explain this, because I could imagine that some people listening are like, okay, I want the path for real. And most of the people who listen to our show are already very much engaged with that. But I would imagine there are a lot of people who are like, so how? And your book lays that out beautifully. So I don't mean give us the step-by-step blueprint, because that's just more strip mining. But the frame that you use that I think really makes sense to almost everybody is the hero's journey. and you quote from Joseph Campbell, and this idea that we each have a hero's journey to live out, and that our own, if we're really connected to our own hero's journey, that is an awakening path, that's what it has to be, because we're all going home if we really connect genuinely with what's unfolding in us, and if we can really get to this quantum view. So since I think that really makes good sense to people as a frame, that we're all born into our own hero's journey and our own path that has its own intelligence of unfolding. I'm curious if you could speak to that a little bit for people listening who are saying like, okay, yes, I am fed up with McMindfulness. What does the hero's journey really look like? How do I even plug that into my own worldview so that I can commit to that more deeply?
Yeah, the hero's journey, I mean, I've been so impacted. I mean, my own hero's journey has been impacted by it because I was raised in a very chaotic household with an alcoholic father, and there was not that much emotional attunement and a lot of material opportunities. And there wasn't that fundamental sense of unconditional positive regard or unconditional love. And I was hacking and burning and basically turned my aggression inwards at a very early start. And if it were not for finding a few key spiritual figures at my high school who turned me on to such things as, one of my teachers when I was 16 turned me on to Siddhartha. That was a seminal book. But the other teacher turned me on to the collection of Bill Moyer's conversations with Joseph Campbell, that on PBS, I think it was. And so there's my start at 16 years old, is Joseph Campbell talking about each of us is called at some point. And we are called out of a struggle to follow a path that is less traveled. And that's the beginning, is like everybody's born into the status quo, and we're basically like sheep. And then out of the blue, there comes a phone call, and you get the choice whether you're going to answer it or not then and there. But if you don't answer it then and there, then don't worry. You're not shit out of luck. You don't get it once. Life is going to come knocking.
It's going to find you everywhere you live.
Definitely, just don't worry. Don't like live in regret. Oh, there's only one phone call. Oprah called and I didn't answer it. Never going to shit out of luck. It's going to come again and again and again. And when you want, it will take courage. That's the one thing. It will take courage to answer that call, because the call is going to say something like, you're right. The way that you've been living isn't satisfying. The lies that your culture gave you, your family systems that are out of whack, your body that is like dying on you, whatever it is, the girlfriend or boyfriend that left you, whatever the story is. I mean, it is part and parcel, the quintessential movement of every human being to struggle with death, illness, sickness, old age, depression, sadness, and then ask themselves, why am I here? Who am I? Why am I here? And where am I going? That's what it boils down to, the mono myth. Mm-hmm. Who am I? Why am I here? And where am I going? And the hero's journey, whether it is whatever culture, whatever epoch, it is a template for proceeding through these various milestones. The first one is answering that bloody call, like going, shit, it's not working. I can't live here. And by the way, I'm 42 years old, and I had built a really successful psychotherapy practice. I worked with unbelievable people. I had a tenured, not a tenured, but a faculty position at very credible university, a wonderful position at my institute. I mean, on paper, after already struggling with my first hero's journey call at 16, it's not like that was it. There's another one.
Oh, there are so many.
Oh, shit.
Yeah. You don't just get an A on one test and then you're done.
Got to do it all over again.
Yeah.
So that was 20 years ago that I answered the first one, and it brought me through all the, signs that Joseph Campbell laid out, including, leaving the Shire and then entering into the dark place, which was my time in India, but then finding guides who were going to train you, you know, the Obi-Wan Kenobi type figures. And then finding the elixir. The elixir for me was the unconditional love that my first teacher gave me, which was I'll cry thinking about it because I had so much self-aggression and still have a lot of it. But at that point, I never had someone whose presence was alchemically so generously given without anything in return, without the wish for anything in return, which couldn't be more of a 180-degree difference than how my upbringing with my own parents were. And that was the beginning of some felt sense that there could be a different way to live. And that was the elixir moment. And then there was the return home, which is how do you spend time with that elixir, and you suddenly want to, you want to savor it, but you also want to share it. So then 20 years of my life's work going to PhD and then working with the Tibetans and working with my teachers and learning how to integrate and building a system and building a protocol and building a program, building a school. And then I get to a place where like a year and a half ago, I just there's the call again. It's not working out. I'm not sleeping. Literally the office walls of my psychotherapy practice feel like they are closing in. The same with my relationships with important figures feel like they are coming to an end. And every part of me is resisting because on paper it's so good. I was living the dream of a well-spent life. I honestly believe that. It came out of tremendous effort, but it was guided by Bodhisattva vow, and I was following the Lam Rim, but every single night, until I got so distraught that I was wondering if I could go on. I remember turning to my wife Emily and going, I don't know if I can do this. I don't know if I can get up. And I have two small kids, younger than 4, each of them. Okay, and I was like, every fiber in my body and being was telling me, you cannot stay here. This has become the new Shire. So that's almost like a 20-year cycle where you come all the way back home, but it's not the home of liberation. It's the home of this has become like the ordinary routine again. And now you're complacent, and now you're comfortable, and some part of you is not growing, and you're not listening, you motherfucker. You're not listening.
Yep.
Yeah, life really pressurizes at a certain point.
To get you to pick up the call.
Suffocating. It really was suffocating. And so then and it's just so funny that happens to coincide with the release of the book. So the book finally comes out. It was a real hardship to write. I'm not a great writer. I'm not well read. I have limitations with how to articulate things. And it was a real struggle. And anybody who's taking on a book, I wish them well. Good luck with it. But for me, it was great hardship. It was in the depths of the winter with, freezing cold in my basement with 2 kids under 4 and in the midst of this midlife crisis. So now the book is out and I started listening. Now I'm listening. I'm giving up every single bit of my life. Everything is up for reevaluation. I'm ready to move. I'm ready to let go. I'm ready to surrender. And the thing is it's not pretty. I don't know where I'm going to land. I don't know what's going to happen. It's like the whole world is shaking me up on both a Saturn return mixed in with some deadly Pluto, with a lot of shit kicked up from childhood where I get to re-examine stuff. And it's messy and it's dirty and it's painful and I wouldn't wish it on anyone, and I don't have any clear answers except for just keep planting good seeds and have a little bit of faith that if I surrender, I will be caught by reality. The world will catch me. That's right. And I will land. But it's not, I'm not telling myself that it's not creating any more ease. I'm just following the warrior's code.
Right. It's just giving you more courage in a sense.
Yes, and I would say, so this is for your grace and grit audience. Fuck pleasure, go for purpose. Purpose is the new pleasure principle. One day I'll write an article with you girls, okay? Well, pleasure is passé. The new pleasure is purpose. because pleasure comes and goes, but purpose can help you survive even the most deadly incidents. And I have woken up wondering if I could make it to the next day, but I'm driven by purpose. I have my boys to take care of. I have students who are really committed and inspiring. I had this book to put out. And even though every fiber in my being is dying, I'm literally in a bardo, what the Tibetans call the between state between life and rebirth. And I'm committed to my bodhisattva commitments, and I'm still practicing, but it doesn't give me relief.
Right.
The only thing that is helping is being driven by purpose. So I don't know where we got on that. I don't know how we got there.
You're on track. Brooke talked about the hero's journey. You're right.
Oh, the hero's journey. Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, make it applicable. Okay, everybody at some point is going to be faced with this phone call, and it's going to be a matter of picking up or not. But I guess what I hope is books like mine and others offer some roadmap once you've picked up the call, because the next thing is, okay, I get it. I don't like the way I've been living. I don't like the culture the way it is. But what are the alternatives, and how do I get from point A to point B? Because a 8-week mindfulness, 8-week MBSR course is not going to give you the whole shebang.
Well, part of why this is maybe such a niche audience is it can come off sounding as if it's bad news. Like when I first
it is bad news.
And
well, it's bad news to a part of you.
It's bad news for our culture. Anybody who's trying to make money on this stuff, watch out.
Yeah, exactly.
Definitely that won't last.
I mean, when I started my spiritual path, and Buddhism was really my first love, it was the first thing that turned me on and everything. When I used to read about enlightenment, not only did it feel pretty far out there, like, oh God, if I could ever even get close, that's unimaginable. But I had a lot of ideas about what it was. I mean, I had a lot of concepts that were untrue, and most of them involved this like really detached bodhisattva who never had to deal with the mess and the fray of my own trauma and emotionality, right? And boy, was I disappointed. That's what I mean by these like stages of disillusionment, to find out, wow, it's actually about being fully human, right? Like, oh, you had a cool quote that your teacher gave you. Breaking out is only as important as how we break back in, right? So, what sounds like bad news is we're saying it's not going to be all just bliss, right? It's not just this easy path. And here's Miles talking about, hey, here's a journey, I've outlined it, and in the meantime, I'm in the middle of this like crazy dark night experience, and I don't know which way to go. But what's amazing is there's still, it's like the Matrix. We all know the Matrix in this.
I always love when Vanessa stops and goes, it's like all the Matrix.
Let's just talk about the Matrix, right? It's like the old blue pill, red pill situation, right? Do you want truth or not? And there are some of us that it's almost like I don't think we're wired to deny truth. I think when we're in denial, we constantly feel it as like a gnawing or a symptom that's arising in our life. And so we're constantly turning towards what's more true. And there's good news in that. It doesn't matter that sometimes, I mean, Brooke and I talk about this on the show all the time, and you're clearly sharing this. Like, sometimes it feels like life's falling apart. Sometimes it feels like we're falling apart. Sometimes it feels like there's nothing to anchor to. Sometimes it feels really blissful. Sometimes I feel really open. All of that is a part of the experience. But what I treasure and what feels better than any of the false hope I had earlier in life is feeling closer to being real. I mean, that's the good news. Would you guys agree?
Absolutely. I mean, being aligned with reality, even if you're in the midst of hell never feels good. But at a certain point, you become the kind of person who can't wear another Halloween costume or believe in the Halloween costumes that you didn't realize you were wearing, once you get a little glimpse of that.
Yeah, it's like pretend not hell is worse than hell.
Yes, just real hell, and just letting yourself, just acknowledging that that's the truth of what's up, has a certain kind of relief in it.
Maybe, Miles, this could be a useful point to talk a little bit about the guru, because we read your book, and you give a lot of attention to the fact that you've had many beautiful teachers or gurus in your life who've supported you. You just mentioned it. Brooke and I have as well. And, oftentimes it's like the path home isn't for sissies, right? And it's really easy to get lost amidst your own conditioning and amidst the cultural confusion. So teachers have been so important for us, as well as spiritual friends. But then, in our Western culture, look at all the documentaries. We see gurus behaving badly. We see the Western resistance to a concept that is like we hand over our identity to the guru, or we hand over our individuality to the guru. And I think on some level that can create resistance to people finding the right support for this worldview and this context. Like, they don't even want to commit to one religious path, never mind one teacher sometimes. And so I wonder if we could talk about the role that you think a guru has, or even how you would define guru.
Oh, it's do you have 3 more hours?
We'll just wrap it up. Yeah, exactly.
From the Tibetan point of view, the guru is the root of the path, which means from the outset, when you answer the phone call on your hero's journey, pretty soon thereafter, you're looking for a teacher. Because if you had a plane crash and you wound up in the Amazon, and you try to hack your way through on your own, the chances of you making it are so slim. And that's like life. If there are few people that make it through unassisted. You can call them geniuses, or we put them in the very 1.01%, let's say. So from the Tibetan point of view, if the metaphor is the jungle of confusion, then the guru is the guide that helps you learn how to identify the right plants so that you can eat, drink, and work your way through the Amazon to find your way to the other side. And the same is true in mundane world. I mean, if you want to be an architect or a pianist or a gymnast or whatever, if you're not, you can't learn that stuff on Amazon or on YouTube. You have to have a master teach you. If you really want to go for gold, if you really want to be a Michael Phelps, you need an instructor. If you want to be a Serena Williams, you have to have the most expert help assisting you. And sometimes behind the scenes, these are huge teams of people that are helping the one person get to the moon, So it takes a village, in other words, and so what I think is that just as a number of other issues in our culture, our secular culture is phobic to the guru principle as another reaction to the pre-Age of Reason or pre-Enlightenment period in Europe, where authority was misusing power, and we have been traumatized. And as a result of being traumatized, we are at best skeptical and at worst phobic to the spiritual figure. Okay, and so secular society won't put up with it and has condemned it. And I see this all the time. I have found ways to work with this. And in the book, I don't try to shy away from these things because, listen, you guys are therapists too. Traumatized people, finding safe spaces for them so that they avoid that which they are noxious about is not the full course of treatment, is it?
No, absolutely. Or your life gets so small.
Safety is a precursor. You have to have some safety, but you only use safety provisionally to help ease people back into relationship with that which is noxious. So secular society at some point is going to have to contend with its traumatization of religion. And what better way to use that than to use science as a land bridge to help explain some of these things? And that's what I'm doing in the book. Let's take, for example, the guru figure. Let's take altars and offerings. Let's take prayer. All of these things from a secular point of view are speculative metaphysics that are to be, sitting around praying for God for, a child to be born or for $1 million to drop out of the sky never worked. What a bunch of craziness. Oh, let's talk about the Crusades, by the way, that's killed millions of people. Why do we need this archaic thing? I mean, just listen to some Sam Harris for about half an hour.
Sure.
Okay. And you have some good points why we should be suspicious about religion and drop the whole thing. On the other hand, dropping the whole thing doesn't change the transgenerational trauma imprint that we have been afflicted by, that keeps pushing it generation after generation, the averse reaction, the phobic averse reaction. It doesn't solve the trauma. So if you take the lens of science and you superimpose it on some of the things I'm talking about from the Tibetan Buddhist tradition, like the guru figure or a visualization on a guru or an altar or an offering or a prayer, and you start to say, well, we're not just doing a prayer and hoping that someone's going to rescue us. A prayer is a way of creating a new neural network in our brain. An altar isn't like a metaphysics thing where you put something out to some separate being. An altar is a workstation where you are rehearsing generosity. And what does generosity do? Generosity changes your neural filter so that you are coming from a place of more abundance, let's say. And you could just talk about it from a neuroscience point of view, and you could really ground it, and you could retain the beauty of the spirit part of it, but you don't have to make it into this woo-woo, senseless thing. And you don't also have to throw it out. And so what is a guru? A guru is someone whose mind has been transformed, that is going to serve as a land bridge or a parental figure for you to download certain bits of humanity and information that you want to reinstall in your program, dislodging the old neurotic self and upgrading it. Or you want to go from Yosemite to Mojave. You need another human being for that. And so you got to find better human beings. Now, there are scandals, and believe me, as a therapist, and I'm sure you've gotten a few calls recently, people that are involved in communities where there are scandals. It's an egregious, horrific, completely debasing, I wouldn't wish it on anyone, experience, because spiritual life is so core and central. And if your spiritual teacher deceives you or abuses you or abandons you or sexually violates you, it's deeply, deeply traumatizing. But just like every trauma, the reaction is to generalize it. Suddenly, no gurus are worthwhile. Suddenly, everything they taught me needs to be thrown out. Suddenly, I've got to abandon my entire practice. And so these are the normal symptomatic reactions, trauma reactions. And what we have to do is we have to help people parse out the unfortunate bits and keep the positive bits and help them integrate the whole experience, because it's actually just like the crisis I'm going through. There's a lot to learn there. There's a lot to learn about life and about how to trust again, and how to trust with less naivete, but how to trust in more appropriate ways, and how to rely on people in more. We are talking about middle way that avoids the extremes between over-idealization and complete distancing and skepticism. We're talking about how do you show up where you can admire the qualities of other people who have something to teach you, and therefore expose your brain to information that can help you optimize, but not doing it by disenfranchising yourself and neglecting your intuitions. I mean, this is the thing: is if we really listened, we'd have a lot of information while we were going through relationships. And sometimes when you over-idealize people, you neglect your own information that's telling you something isn't right here. And so, and my sense is that in these traumas with guru figures, it is very difficult at the moment to really listen to your intuitions. But that doesn't mean you can't learn that retroactively. You can go back and go, oh, I wasn't listening. I wasn't listening to all the signals that were telling me this wasn't working out, or this something was a little off, but I can learn that now, and so the whole experience doesn't have to just come and go and be like a tornado and level the whole, your whole life. You can learn so much retroactively if you're willing to invest in getting closer to the problem. So I would say, just in brief, that the guru figure is a necessary piece of the apparatus of the spiritual path, but it's rife with problems. But everything is rife with problems. I mean, like going to your therapist, getting on a bus is rife with problems. Using the technology that we are surrounded by is rife with problems. All right, so like, what are we going to do? Is be averse to using a tool? No, you have to use the tool correctly. And sometimes you cut your finger with a knife, but what do you do? No, you don't use a knife anymore? No, you learn how to use it better.
Right,
I think you did quite well without 3 hours.
Sorry.
No, I think that was a beautiful summation. Yeah. I mean, because we wanted to get into how you use neuroscience as a bridge as well. And that was a beautiful illustration of that.
Mm.
Yeah. It's very helpful.
Yeah. I know it's about ready to wrap up, Brooke, and I want to give you a chance to ask any questions you may have, but just one thing to add to what you said, because looking at neuroscience and how we approach, let's say, altars or prayers or all of these different things, when I first learned like deity visualization kinds of meditations, I was working with White Tara. I was part of the Sakya lineage in Buddhism. So you do these visualizations and you picture kind of like a specific sort of, we could call it heaven for this conversation. And it's got blue floors and it's crystal, and then you become the goddess and, you know, all of these other things. And it can seem, even to some people, especially as we look at non-dualism today, it can seem irrelevant, right? Like, why do we have to have a figure for a god or a goddess and all this archetypal stuff? But I started to understand, I think the beginning of the understanding happened in the program with you, but even as I just started to understand reality more, like, what you're doing is, like, grossly deconstructing the conditioning you have that makes you think this world is any particular way. Like, I already am conditioned to think this desk is solid and I am Vanessa and you guys are who you are, and that's conditioning. And when I could begin to picture this reality, it wasn't just my imagination, it was the deconstructing in my mind of some concrete, solid reality that looks the way I think it looks. And then, of course, you can foster these experiences in your body like gratitude or compassion and everything as you embodied the archetype of the god or goddess that change your wiring. And it changes your sense of possibility for who you are and for what the world could look like this quantum view. So I do think it's interesting. Everyone finds their own path, and it's fine to have some skepticism. Questions are always welcome. But it is interesting how in the name of like rationality, we throw everything out as if they haven't figured something out thousands of years ago.
So beautifully put. And I would just say that Tibet is a good example of a tradition or culture that didn't jettison faith for reason. They actually maintained both. So, for example, they have incredible sciences and logic and epistemology that rival Western academic, rigorous scientific disciplines. But at the same time, on the Dalai Lama's political staff is an oracle. Mm-hmm. No one talks about this. They love the Dalai Lama. They love, he's so sweet and cute, and everybody loves the Dalai Lama.
So lovable.
But the reason he's alive is because on the night that he fled, he had already consulted an oracle about when to do it. Mm. And there's a state oracle for Tibet who goes into a trance and channels mystical beings and comes up with direction for the country.
I love it. I'm a mystical kind of gal, so I'm all about that life.
Mm-hmm. So they're an example of a culture that was able to maintain a very pronounced spirituality. And when we're talking about spirit, we're talking about above and beyond the material world. We're talking about a quantum where there are different agencies and different frequencies and things that wouldn't be acceptable to just the modern materialistic paradigm. And at the same time, they have a very rigorous materialism also, and a very rigorous scientific paradigm. So they maintain both. Mm-hmm. And those visualizations, I describe the psychological mechanism that you've just described. I unpack it in a whole chapter in the book, in which we can make sense of a deep guru yoga or a deity practice. I mean, I'm liking it these days to VR, virtual reality. If we could put goggles and a program on a 10-year-old where instead of playing like, I don't know the games because I never played them, but like, I don't know, you name it, like some shoot 'em up, shoot 'em up
or a race car game or
a race car game, right? If you could put on goggles so that they saw themselves where they were, the purpose of the game was to save others, and you get points for doing it. And as you rescued other people and got points, you also became incredibly competent and flexible in your mentality that you could open doors in other worlds. In other words, you could like go beyond the infrastructure of the program to find hidden realms which would be really habituating you to see possibilities that aren't obvious. Mm-hmm. That's quantum view, right? So we're talking about a VR game that enhances your open-heartedness or altruism, and at the same time, quantum view. Where would our children be? Like, because we're going down the road of technology anyway.
Yeah.
So
God, it says so much about our culture that doesn't exist, right? Like there's so many games. It's so amazing that nobody. I want you to video game developing.
Yes,
is your next.
Somebody from your
please.
Grace and Grit community has $1 million and is tied or connected to
right.
the VR world. Please contact me.
Please. That would be amazing. Yeah. There's one video game that my son played where you would get to you would win the game the more compassionate you could be.
Exactly.
But other than that, I've never seen any game. It's amazing, right? There's so many video games. Why not that?
Yeah, or business executives could enhance their altruism by imagining themselves doing unbelievable feats of virtue and conducting themselves ethically. And they would change their brain structure in a 30-minute session. But that's basically what Tibetans have been doing. What do you think those yogis are doing in those caves? They are VRing themselves to enlightenment.
Right.
Organic old school, yo.
I can't wait to quote that. VRing themselves to enlightenment. That's going to be
organic old school, yo. Yeah. So into it. Miles, I'm so grateful for your work, and I'm so grateful we had a chance to talk with you about it. Thank you so much.
My pleasure, and I'd love to do it again. And to your whole community, I'm so glad that you provide an opportunity for people to get real on this path. It's like one of the big virtues of mine, and so I'm so blessed and fortunate to have met you. And I really appreciate the honest work that you're doing, and I look forward to having another conversation with you because we need more time together.
Yes, I would love. We would both love that, I'm sure.
Yeah, I look forward to it.